Okay. So today's daf is daf nun gimel. We are at actually more like in the middle of daf nun bet and bet, but it was really a very good place to stop relative to the rest of today, because we're going to now get into a very long piece that is all tied together, that will get us to the beginning of Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, and so it made sense to do it that way. So let's get this summary up, and we'll begin by noting the following. We have seen a debate in Maseches Yevamot between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, and we referenced it again yesterday. Rabbi Akiva says that there is no legal marriage. It's not possible to marry someone if the Torah has any prohibition of that marriage, of that relationship. So even if there is only what is known as a lav, a sin that's generally punishable by lashes and not by death from above or death from the court. So even in that situation, there is no marriage. You could try to marry the person, and of course you can engage in marital relations with the person, but it is not a marriage. It doesn't work. The Chachamim say they agree with Rabbi Akiva with respect to situations where the punishment is kares or worse. And there are various opinions on that, because there was the opinion that said that it was only in connection with penalties, that death penalties by courts, that we say that there's no marriage. But in general, the majority opinion and the view that we take is that the situation where marriage cannot exist is where the punishment is kares or worse. So with that background, Rav Yehuda explained yesterday that when our Mishnah said that no action taken after Chalitza has legal significance, it had to be according to Rabbi Akiva. Because the Chachamim, because now we need a second rule, right? And the second rule to remember is what is the status of a man with the widow of his brother after the two of them perform chalitza. So before they perform chalitza, if the brother dies and they have children, or if the brother dies and they get divorced, but the brother and the widow or the wife get divorced, so Reuven and Rachel get divorced, then there is a kares prohibition for the brother to marry that divorcee, because it's his brother's wife. But when it comes to and it's punishable by kares. Whereas if, on the other hand, the Reuven dies without children, and now there's a possibility of doing yibum, so then it's all permitted at the moment. But then once the person does chalitza, she goes back to being forbidden to him. But we've seen that the forbidden nature of that is only a lav. Now, if it's only a lav, then according to the Chachamim, a marriage could technically take place. So when we say no action after chalitza has legal significance, it has to be according to Rabbi Akiva, because the Chachamim say that if the couple attempted to marry, they could do so. So we ended yesterday with Rebbe noting that maybe we could distinguish between whether an action has legal significance after chalitza based on the man's intention. If the man is trying to perform yibum with the act of marriage, well, yibum after chalitza doesn't work, because either you do yibum or you do chalitza, and once you've done one of them, the other one is not relevant. But if in fact the person is trying to actually perform an actual marriage, so then Rebbe would say, so then yes, that actually is a valid action afterwards. So now that we've got that framework, we're going to learn another brisa that will detail the debate between Rebbe and the Chachamim, who don't make that distinction based on intention. And we're going to go through and provide 6 possible explanations for why one of them distinguishes based on intention, and one of them says, no, whatever action you take, that's what matters. Doesn't make a difference what you have in mind. So let's take a look, and we're beginning at Tanya Idach. It is 21 lines up from the bottom, and we're quoting another brisa. So Tanya Idach, Hacholis Livamto, because of the kitcha, if you do chalitza with the widow. So again, Reuven is our unfortunate husband who died without children. He leaves Rachel, and now Shimon does chalitza with Rachel, and then he goes back and he marries her and he does kedushin with her. So Rabbi Omer, im kitcha l'shum ishus, if he did so in order to marry her, he did a traditional kedushin of harayat mekudeshes li. So then suricha heimenu get, then she requires a get because it is a legal action. But l'shum yevamot, but if in fact he was trying to make her his yibum wife, well then ain't suricha heimenu get. Then she doesn't require a get because his action was not had no legal significance, because you can't do yibum after the chalitza. On the other hand, the chachamim omrim ben shekid shalashum ishus ben shekid shalashum yavmos tzricha hemenu get. Doesn't make a difference what your intention is. The action is all that matters. So Amar Rav Yosef, my time of the Rebbe. So what's the reasoning of Rebbe? Look, it's clear with the reasoning of the chachamim, because they all say that your action, your reason don't matter. What matters is the actions that you take, and a very powerful philosophical lesson as well. Asau, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So Asau ka'oder b'niktei hager v'chsavur shalohein. So we're treating this like a situation where somebody is hoeing in the property of somebody who is a convert, and the convert has died and now has no inheritors, and so as a result, because the convert has no one to inherit, the land becomes hefker, it becomes ownerless, and so. But in this case, a person did the hoeing thinking it was his own property. Well, delokani. In that situation, that is not going to be kona. So according to that is the reasoning of Rebbe. Rebbe says that, look, this is just like hoeing property without an intention to take acquisition, and as a result, even though you were hoeing the property, and that's a method of showing ownership of something, we're not going to give you credit for it, and you're not going to have actually taken ownership. Similarly, Rebbe would say, when you're trying to do yibum, after you've done chalitza, you're doing an irrelevant act. And so as a result, it's not going to create any acquisition. But Abaye asks a question on Rav Yosef, and therefore will offer a second explanation. So Amrle Abaye mitami, are these cases comparable? Hasam lo kamuchaven milamikne. In the case of the property of the real estate, where the person is hoeing on land that didn't belong to him, he had no intention to acquire property at all. But Hacha, in our case, he does want to marry the person. He's just trying to marry, Shimon is just trying to marry Rachel through the wrong mechanism. So, halo damya ella laoder b'nichse ger zeh v'chesaver shel ger acher tehu dekani. And in fact, if you want to make an analogy, the analogy would be as if I were going to hoe in John Doe's property, and it ended up being Christo's property. And so as a result, even though I was trying to take possession of John Doe's property, I actually affected an acquisition of Christo's property. So, as Christo converted, he has no heirs. And so as a result, I've effectively been able to take possession, even though I was not intending to take over his property. And we say that that works. So if you were trying to make that analogy, Rav Yosef, then it should work even according to Abaye. So I'm sorry, it should work even according to Rebbe. And so as a result, Abaye offers a new approach. Ella Amar Abaye Hachabamayaskina. Here's what we're talking about. Kagonda Amarla his Kadshili b'Mamar Yevamot. He actually used a language of Yibum. It's not just that he said Hareyat Mikudeshesli and it was all in his head. It was an actual differentiation of wording. And he said, and this is probably where Rashi got the wording from that we mentioned the other day of what is the wording of a mamar. So if he said the mamar for Yibum, so then Rebbe Sabar mamar ilave v'zika karame, that mamar has to be based on a zika, meaning there has to be some kind of connection between the Shimon and Rachel. And if you sever that connection, if you sever that connection with Chalitza, so now Shimon and Rachel, the widow of his brother Ruvain, have done Chalitza, there is no connection between them. And the Mamar requires a connection for it to have effect. The Rabbanan Savre and the rabbis say, these are each separate ideas, and they don't have to be connected. And so as a result, when one does mamar, it doesn't make a difference whether there's any relationship whatsoever. So mi'ikara, before they do, and now the rabbis explain mikara, before chalitza had happened, ilu amar la his kadshi li b'mamar yevamin, Milo Mahani. If you would have said his Kajuli Mamar Yevamot, it would that you are betrothed to me with the Mamar of Yibum. So then wouldn't that have worked? Yes. So Hashtanami Mahani, it's still going to work. Even though there's no more Zika, that isn't, according to the rabbis, what is determining whether or not the Mamar is effective. So that is explanation number 2. And now we go on to explanation number 3. Rava disagrees with Abaye, and Rava Amar, Ida Amar La Mamar Yivamin, if they were to just use that I'm doing the Mamar of Yibum, well, Kuli Almilo Pligi de Mahanya. Everybody would say that's effective because, again, it's effective before Chalitza, it should be effective after Chalitza. But here's what we're talking about. Kagon de Amar La Hiskachi Li Bezikas Yevamim. You are betrothed to me with the Zika of Yibum. Now, the Zika of Yibum is clearly not a marriage statement, but we'll say that when there's no Chalitza, where there hasn't been Chalitza, we'll understand it to mean that it is a marriage statement. But now that there's been Chalitza, so then Rebbe Sabar, what does Rebbe think? So we turn now to Gimel Amud Aleph. Yesh Zika, he says that there is a deep Zika bond between the Shimon and Rachel when Ruvain dies. And when Chalitza happens, it cuts it completely. And so as a result, there's nothing left. So when you say Hareyat, when you say that, when you say his kadshi li bezikas yevamin, so as a result, that there's no zika to base it on, to base that marriage statement on. There's no connection left. However, Rabbanan Sabri ain't zika. They say that there's no zika, meaning that there is no rabbinic ramifications of the fact that Rachel and Shimon are intended for one another because Reuven has died without children. That there's that connection that exists when Shimon needs to make the decision to do Yibum or Chalitza. That connection doesn't have extra legal ramifications. So mi'ikara ilu amar la iskajili bezikas yavamin milo mahani ashtanam mahani. And so the rabbis think in this in sort of almost like a flip of what you might have thought. Essentially, the rabbis say because there's not a strong connection between Shimon and Rachel, when it gets severed, it's not such a big thing to have been severed. And so even when it has been severed, when you say you're betrothed to me with the Zika of the Yibum, so we're going to say that it's still effective. Whereas because Rebbe would say that there is a strong Zika bond, when we break the bond, you can't put it back together. And so as a result, it doesn't work. So that's opinion number 3. And again, it's a little bit somewhat counterintuitive because the stronger initial connection prevents a later connection or marriage, while a weaker initial connection actually enables a later connection / marriage. So the stronger initial connection is according to Rebbe, and the weaker one is according to the Chachamim. Okay, so now opinion number 4, Rav Sharavia Amar B'chalitza Kshera. No, actually, when there has been a valid chalitza, a full-fledged chalitza, Ida Amar La Hiskachi Bezikas Yevamot, if they would have said that you're married to me with the Zika of Yibum, Kuli Amalo Pligi Delo Mahani, everybody would agree that it doesn't work. Meaning, if you have a full-fledged chalitza, doesn't make a difference whether you say Yesh Zika or Ain Zika. A full-fledged chalitza breaks the whole thing and it can't get put back together. Zika is no longer a relevant issue. And so as a result, referencing Zika doesn't do anything. But what are we talking about here? What's the argument between Rebbe and the Chachamim? We're dealing with a situation where there is a not fully, we call it chalitza pasula, but again, it doesn't mean that it's totally invalid. It's a deficient chalitza. And how is it deficient? It is deficient because at that moment when the chalitza is done between this man and this woman, they were not allowed to do yibum. And so, for example, if Shimon, if now let's say Reuven dies and he leaves Rachel and Leah as his 2 widows, and Shimon, the one brother, gives a get to Rachel, and then he does chalitza with Rachel, that is considered a deficient chalitza according to some opinions, and as a result, it may not fully work on Leah, even though he has done chalitza. And usually, if you do chalitza with either Rachel or Leah, it ends the relationship with both of them. If it's a deficient, if it's a chalitza pasula, where it was after a get, so then maybe it doesn't necessarily also break the relationship with Leah. So Mar Savar, so when Rebbe says chalitza pasula poteres, he says that it does release Leah. Mar Savar chalitza pasula eino poteres. It does not, and so Rebbe says that it is effectively a full break, and therefore, whatever you say, even if you were to say hiskachi li bezikas yevamim, it would not be a marriage. When it says, but the rabbis say no, chalitza basula eino poteres. It does not actually completely release her, and so as a result, it can work. But now, number 5, Rav Ashi disagrees with that. Rav Ashi says the following: Vashi Amar, no, everybody agrees that a non-perfect chalitza does not actually release the widow, does not actually release Rachel completely, but rather we're dealing with a situation where there is a condition to the chalitza. And so what's the condition? The idea is that if I say, if Shimon says to Rachel that you are hereby a chalitza to me, or it does the process of chalitza and says that this process of chalitza is only on the condition that you give me $200, and she does not give the $200. So then, if the condition is a valid condition, well, then the chalitza is not a good chalitza because she didn't do the condition. But if we say that a stipulation, a condition to an action, does not work with respect to chalitza, remarkably, we don't say that the chalitza doesn't happen at all, but rather we say it's a valid chalitza. So again, there are two possibilities. So let's, again, in all cases, we're talking about Shimon saying to Rachel, we are going to do chalitza, but only the chalitza is only good if you give me $200. So if we say that you're allowed to have stipulations with regard to chalitza, well then, if Rachel doesn't do the $200, so then it's not a good chalitza. On the other hand, all right, so Mar Savar, so Rebbe says yesh tanai b'chalitza. He says that there is tanai b'chalitza, and so since in this situation we're dealing with a situation where a Shimon instituted a condition to the chalitza, and that condition has not been fulfilled. So as a result, the chalitza wasn't a valid chalitza, and so therefore, when Shimon says his gadshi lead the zikas Yevamot, it's a good marriage. That's why the intention makes a difference. But Umar Savar ain't tanai b'chalitza. But when the Rav, I'm sorry, I got it reversed. I apologize. So Mar Savar, the rabbis say yesh tanai b'chalitza, and so therefore it doesn't make a difference what your intention is. All that matters is was the stipulation fulfilled or not. And if the stipulation was not fulfilled, so then there was no chalitza. Umar Savar ain't tanai b'chalitza. There is no tanai b'chalitza, and so as a result, it was a full chalitza, and therefore we ignore the stipulation, and a fully valid chalitza occurred. And so as a result, that's why attempting to marry using Zika language would not work. So for the rabbis, there was no chalitza here, and so as a result, using that Zika language does work. So they all agree that the Zika language only works if chalitza has not happened. And so when they argue, the Rebbe and the Chachamim are arguing, they're arguing, does a condition on chalitza impose that condition, or do we ignore the condition? That's the debate that they're having. And final, now Ravina disagrees with that. Ravina Amar, no. To Kuli Alma Yesh Tanai b'chalitza. Really, everybody agrees that one is allowed to make a stipulation with respect to chalitza. V'hacha b'tanai kafel kamifliki. But they're arguing about what's known as a double condition. And they're arguing, do you need to have a double condition? Mar Savar, Rebbe says, Inan Tanai kafel, we do need a double condition. And why do we need a double condition? So let's start there by saying, what is a double condition? A double condition is saying, and again, we're dealing with the condition of she gives the $200 must be given by Rachel to Shimon in order for the chalitza to be effective. So if you give me $200, then the chalitza will be effective. And if you do not give me $200, then the chalitza will not be effective. Okay, so that's the double condition. You see how there were two pieces to that condition? The first part is if you give me $500, so that and then it will be effective. And the second part is if you do not give me $500, or now I said 200, but whatever, it doesn't make a difference the amount. If we say if you do not give me $500, then it will not be effective. So that's the double condition. So Rebbe says that we do require a double stipulation, and we're dealing with a situation where there was a single stipulation, where the person only said, if you give me $500, then it'll be effective. They did not say, if you do not give me $500, it will not be effective. So Rebbe says, because you need to have a double stipulation in order for any stipulation to be valid, it's as if there was no stipulation here, and it's a totally good chalitza. Umar Sabar, whereas the rabbis say, lo be'inan tonight. We don't need a double stipulation, and so as a result, when Shimon says to Rachel, "If you give me $500, then the chalitza will be valid," that's a good condition. And because Rachel has not given the $500 yet, no chalitza has taken place. And so now, when Shimon says his kachi li bezikas Yevamot, so according to Rebbe, there has been chalitza, and so as a result, that statement doesn't work. But according to the Chachamim, there has not been chalitza, because you don't need a double stipulation, you don't need a double condition, you don't need to say both if yes and if no. And so as a result, there is a condition that has not been fulfilled, and so as a result, there's no chalitza yet. And as a result, when you say hiskachili bezikas Yevamot, it's a valid marriage because there's still the connection between Shimon and Rachel that needs to be broken. And when it's not broken, when it's instead enhanced, well, then we'll say that they are married. Okay, so that is the issue of dealing with this debate in the Baraisa between Rebbe and the Chachamim about why it is that according to Rebbe, intention does matter, whereas according to the Chachamim, intention does not matter. Okay, so now the next piece of the Mishnah that we learned at the very beginning of the 5th parak, we learned it a few days ago, I think on Monday. So chalatz v'asam mamar v'nasan get uval. So the next piece, our Mishnah addressed only the fact that nothing works after chalitza. So we're going to now ask, why didn't we say that nothing works after marital relations, after yibum? And so we're going to see. So let's see. V'nisnei nami ein achar bia klum. We say ein achar chalitza klum, but why don't we say ein achar bia klum? So Abaye v'Ravda Amri Tarbayu Tanei ein achar bia klum. Yes, it's true. You can teach the fact that there is no action after having marital relations, meaning that if marital relations is the first thing that you do, if that Shimon does with Rachel, then if he then tries to do chalitza, doesn't work. If he then tries to do mamar, doesn't work, doesn't do anything. Or if he does chalitza or mamar or get with another woman, with another one of Reuven's widows, if Leah is still around and he tries to do mamar, even if he tries to do yibum, if he has marital relations with her, if he does any action with Leah, since he's already done marital relations with Rachel and he's thereby made her his wife, so as a result, there's nothing more to be done. There's no further actions. So why didn't our Mishnah teach this? The truth is we only need to make one of these statements. It's clear that the two statements go together, especially in this instance where we're talking about Bia and Chalitza as the first action between Shimon and Rachel. And so the Tana of our Mishnah wanted to teach about allowing the woman to go free to marry whomever she wanted. The Tana didn't want to talk about the situation of marriage, maybe because of the general preference that we've seen for Chalitza over Yibum. So that's that piece of our Mishnah. The Mishnah continues, and we're going to now basically, you can see in the Gemara, there are lots of two dots. We're going to do very short, brief pieces on each aspect of our Mishnah as we go through the Mishnah. So, we noted that it doesn't make a difference whether there's a single Yevamah or there are two Yevamot. Masnisim deloka ben Azai. So it must be that our Mishnah is not like Ben Azai, because Ben Azai does make a distinction between the two cases. We saw this opinion previously, and now we're citing the Brisa in particular. The Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, Ben Azai Omer, Yesh Mamar Achar Mamar, that we do say Mamar after Mamar, B'shnei Yevamot b'Yevamot achas, when there are two men and one woman. So Reuven married Rachel, Shimon and Levi are their brothers, and both, if Shimon and Levi both do mamar with Rachel, well then both of them are going to be prohibited to marry any of Rachel's relatives. But ve'ein mamar achar mamar b'shtei yevamot v'yavam achad. But if in fact it's Rachel and Leah, so there are two Yevamot, whereas there's only Shimon as the brother, well then, if Shimon does mamar with Rachel, then the mamar that he then does with Leah has no effect, because there's only one connection that can exist there. And so as a result, that will not work, according to Ben Azai. So that's that piece of the Mishnah. So Ketza mamar lazo, then our Gemara, our Mishnah, asks, what's the case of mamar? So 1 second. So now that case is so our Mishnah talked about, we're now on number 4 on the screen. Our Mishnah talked about where the brother did mamar with widow number 2 and chalitza with widow number, did mamar with widow number 1 and chalitza with widow number 2. And we noted that the brother needs to give a get to widow number 1. So the Gemara asks whether, so now the Gemara is asked, so lema misayeh Shmuel, the Amar Shmuel chalatz levalas mamar lo niftaret sarasa. Does the fact that our Mishnah dealt with a case of mamar to widow number 1 and chalitza to widow number 2, does that show that if you perform that when you perform chalitza, if he had done chalitza with just widow number 1, that it wouldn't have freed widow number 2, and that's the position of Shmuel. So is that actually support for Shmuel? And is it utuyub to the Rav Yosef? And does it actually contradict Rav Yosef? Because Rav Yosef says, the Amar of Yosef, and because Rav Yosef says, so Rav Yosef the Gemara assumes that we know that Rav Yosef says, specifically, Rav Yosef says that one should do chalitza with the woman to whom a Kohen is already prohibited to marry. And so in this situation, now that mamar has already happened with widow number 1, she is not going to be allowed to marry anyone else, any Kohen. And so as a result, we say, no, it doesn't have to be. Mikatani choletz, it's not telling us that you should perform chalitza with the second widow, but rather chalatz katani. It's talking about where it already happened. Di'avad, it's post facto, it's after the fact. And so as a result, this is just telling us about a case that actually happened. It is not telling us what should happen. And we will see this exact logic later on in the analysis of the Mishnah as well. So get lazo, we get lazo. So now our Mishnah continued and talked about where one Yavam gave a get to this Yevamah, gave a get to Rachel, and then he gave a get to Leah. So, and what happened in that situation? We said, the Mishnah went on and says, Tzrichot chalitza, they need chalitza. So does that imply, maybe that implies that chalitza needs to be done with each one of them. So the Gemara now says, does this prove Rabbi Bar Huna? Because Amar Rabbi Bar Huna, chalitza pesula tzricha lechazer al kol ha'achid. That when you have a non-fully valid chalitza, again, chalitza pesula doesn't mean that it's totally invalid, but rather not fully valid, because he had already given a get to Rachel. So Shimon gave a get to Rachel, and then he gave a get to Leah. And we say that he needs to do chalitza they require chalitza. So maybe that means he needs to do chalitza with each of the two women. He needs to do chalitza first with Rachel and Leah. And that shows that Rabba bar Huna is correct, because the chalitza that is done, because Shimon can no longer do yibum with either Rachel or Leah, because in both cases he's given them a get, and once a get has been given, you can no longer do yibum, you must do chalitza. And so as a result, and we're seeing that it seems like he needs to do chalitza with both of them. So does that show that Rabba bar Huna is correct? Because Rabba bar Huna says that when you have a deficient chalitza, each brother needs to do his own chalitza. You can't have chalitza by one brother covering everybody. So my tzrichos, no, it does not in fact prove that. Tzrichos de alma. It doesn't mean that these two women each require their own chalitza, but rather women in this general situation require chalitza, and so as a result, that is why it says tzrichot. It does not necessarily mean that each of them require their own chalitza. So we have not proven that Rabba bar Huna is correct. Get lazo. So then the next case of a Mishnah is get lazo v'chalatz lazo, that you gave a get to this one and then did chalitza with the second one. So so similar to our case above in connection with number 4, right? Let's say that this is a proof for Shmuel, who says the chalitza pesula on widow number 1 who got the get would not work for widow number 2, and it contradicts Rav Yosef, who says that one should do chalitza on the woman who got the get so as not to forbid the other woman to kohanim. So as noted above, we're going to have the same answer. Mi katani choletz, no, choletz katani diavad. That we did not actually say an affirmative statements of chalitza should be done, but rather if that's in fact what happened. And so it's just going through all of the permutations. Chalatz, v'chalatz, ochalatz, etc. So and now the Gemara continues with its analysis of the language of the Mishnah. And noted the Mishnah said, again, in the case of 1 Yavam and 2 Yevamot, that any action after chalitza lacks validity, but it didn't make the statement for marital relations / yibum. So again, the listening nami ein achar bia klum. So why don't we say ein achar bia klum? So Abaye v'Rav Damri Tavayu today ein achar bia klum. In fact, you can say ein achar bia klum, as we saw earlier. We saw this in item number 2 in our list here. So all the way back above. And what is it? What's the lesson? Again, Abaye and Rav say it is in fact true that there's no legal significance to once there has been marital relations, but Tana did done, and our Tana focuses on that there's no ein achar chalitza klum because he wanted to emphasize the fact that the release of of Rachel to enable her to marry whenever she wants. That's what he would prefer to discuss. He wants to discuss that case. So ben yavam afad l'shtei yivamot, whether it was 1 yavam to 2 yivamot or other ways. So now the Gemara. So as a reminder, before we do that, let's just again remember the following. Rabbi Yochanan, we had this debate earlier. Rabbi Yochanan says after chalitza, all the brothers are only prohibited with a lav to have relations with Reuven's widow. And Reish Lakish says no. After chalitza, the other brothers who did not perform chalitza are covered by the kares prohibition, meaning they go back to their original status. It's only the brother who performs chalitza who is just covered by a lav. So now, since our Mishnah said that the actions after chalitza lack validity, so the Gemara notes that it makes sense that the Mishnah would need to say this for Rav Yochanan, because most opinions say that marriage can happen after the prohibition is only a lav. But why is it necessary according to Reish Lakish? So let's take a look inside. So Bishlam el Rabbi Yochanan, everything makes sense according to Rabbi Yochanan. This to say that that the second to say that the to say that the actions after chalitza lack validity because kula besa belavkoi, everyone who's left, all the brothers are all only subject to a lav. So istrach lashmeinan the ain kedushin tosin b'chayavin lavin, and what the Mishnah is coming to teach us is that kedushin does not take effect when the women are prohibited with a lav, as we saw earlier, because we hold like Rabbi Akiva, because the Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva. But Elul Reish Lakish, but for Reish Lakish, the Amar Kula Besa B'charis Kai. But when according to Reish Lakish, everybody is covered by the prohibition of kares. Do we need to be told that kedushin does not take an effect with when you have a penalty of kares? Of course not. We don't need to be taught that. Everybody knows that. That's a basic law. That's a basic principle. So, Amar Lach Reish Lakish. So, why does our Mishnah need to go through this case? So, V'tamech, Reish Lakish points out that even if, according to Rabbi Yochanan, there are cases in our Mishnah that aren't required to be taught. Seifa de Katani, what about, according to your logic, when the Seifa says in the end of our Mishnah, Baal v'asa mamar, if they had relations and then the person does mamar, nothing happened. Istrach lashmeinan de ein kedushin tosin ve'eshes ish. Do I need to tell us that there's no kedushin when the woman is married? Meaning, of course, you can't do mamar with the if Ruvain, I'm sorry, if Shimon does Yibum with Rachel, and now the other surviving brother Levi does mamar with Rachel, of course it doesn't work. And Shimon's married to Rachel. You can't try any effort to marry somebody who is already married. A woman who is already married is not going to be successful. So Ella, but no. So what's the whole point here? Once we are teaching all of the different ways that of having one yavam and one yavamah, we also teach all of the permutations when there are two women and one man. So the idea is so we all the permutations, whether it's one man and one woman, two men and one woman, or one woman and two men, or two women and one man, all the permutations, that's what we're looking at. And so as a result, we're just going through systematically. It is not about trying to teach a chiddush with each line. So now the next case in our Mishnah. So again, the Gemara notes that it makes sense to teach about a chalitza followed by mamar. But okay, so Bishlam Chalitza Asa Mamar, it makes sense to teach about the case of Chalitza and then Mamar. Itzrich, we needed Salkatai to Kamina. I might have thought Nigzor Mamar Devasar Chalitza to Mamar to Kamik to Chalitza. That what's the rule if Shimon does Mamar and then Chalitza with Rachel? The rule is that Shimon also needs to give Rachel a get, because Mamar created some aspect of marriage, and that marriage needs to be undone with a get. So Chalitza is not enough. So I might have thought that just as Chalitza is not that when you do Mamar and then Chalitza, you need a get, maybe we'd be worried that if we say Chalitza and then Mamar, you also need to do a get. Because even though Chalitza happened first, maybe we might get confused and we might say, oh, just as chalitza with mamar doesn't require anything, so too mamar with chalitza. Mamar followed by chalitza doesn't require anything. So kamash malan delo gazrina. So it comes to teach us that we didn't teach that gzera. Ela chalatz v'nasan get lamali. But why do you need to tell me about a case where chalitza was done first and then a get was given? Of course it doesn't work. And of course nothing happens. You had chalitza. There's nothing more that could be required. So again, same kind of logic as we just saw. Ema seifa, bal v'asa mamar. If you have a marital relations and then you do mamar with the woman, bal v'nasan get, or you have relations and thereby marry her and then you give her a get. So bishlam a bal v'nasan get. So it makes sense that we need to tell about marital relations and then gave a get. Itzrach salkadaik the kamina, nigs or get the buster be'ila, to get to kami be'ila. That I might have thought that if that we want to make sure that just in case you gave the get before marital relations, because what's the rule if you gave the get before marital relations? If you gave a get before marital relations, you need to do chalitza because you're not allowed to do yibum any longer once you give a get. Once Shimon gives a get to Rachel. So Kamash Malan, Delo Gazrina. And so therefore it needs to tell us that we're not going to make that zera. Even though when you give a get and then you do Be'ila, you need to do Chalitza. If you do Be'ila and then you give a get, we're not going to require you to do Chalitza. So Aval Baal the Asa Mamar. But if you have marital relations and then you do Mamar with that same woman, Lamali. What do I need to tell me this law? Ella, ID the Tana Chalatz v'Asa Mamar, Tananami Baal v'Asa Mamar. We're going through every permutation. Once we're teaching one permutation, we're going to teach them all. But ID the Baal v'Midnei Baal v'Nasan get, Tananami Chalatz v'Nasan get. We're trying to teach every permutation, and so that's what the Mishnah is going to. Not every permutation. Once we're going through every permutation, not every permutation needs to be something that is going to teach us something new. And finally, our the last piece of our Mishnah is Man Shehi. So in our Mishnah, we saw this machlokus between the Tanakama and Rabbi Nechemiah. Tanakama says that nothing works after chalitza, irrespective of when it's done. But when it comes to marital relations and yibum, then it only stops later actions if it was done first. Rabbi Nechemiah says, no, nothing works after chalitza or marital relations / yibum, irrespective of when it's done. Doesn't matter whether mamar and then chalitza, get and then chalitza, mamar then marital relations, get then marital relations. Doesn't matter. Whatever the order is, whenever you do chalitza or marital relations yibum, that's the last final act that has any relevance from a legal perspective, from a legal marriage perspective. So, but now what is our Gemara now? Tell us, Masnisen Delo Ki Haitana. There's somebody else that provides a different viewpoint. The Tanya Abba Yosef ben Yochanan Ish Yerushalayim Omer B'Shum Rabbi Meir. So this Abba Yosef says the following: Achas Be'ilas Be'ila v'Achas Chalitza. Whether you're talking about Be'ila, meaning the performance of Ibum through marital relations, or you're talking about Chalitza, B'Tchila, if it happens as the first action, Ein Acharei Klum, then it doesn't make a difference what happens later. But Emsa Uvasov Yesh Acharei Klum. But if you do something before it, well, then it could make a difference. Then there could be a non-fully valid chalitza, a non-fully valid marital relations, and as a result, there could be some further action that happens afterwards that has some legal effect. The shalosh machlokas bedavar. And so as a result, we see that there are three different opinions. Tanakama Savar, the first opinion in our Mishnah says, via deika lemigzar gazrina, that when it comes to marital relations where we need to make a decree, so then we say that there's a decree, and as a result, only if it happens first does it eliminate anything, because we don't want to encourage on some level marital relations when it may not have a full effect. Chalitza, the legal mixer. But chalitza, there's no reason to make a decree about something afterwards that it should have validity. So lo gazrina, we don't make any decree with respect to it. Rabbi Nechemia Savar, biyanami legal mixer. There's no reason to make a decree about marital relations. Dika amra, ligs or bia achar get. We should decree that if you do bia after the get, mishum bia achar chalitza, then we should have the same concern about marital relations after a get as we have marital relations after chalitza. If that were true, we should have both of those concerns. So kevan de chalitza doraisa mida yade. People know, people understand. Chalitza is a biblical act. People know that it has significance. You don't need to make any kind of decree about it. De ka'amra ligzor bia achar mamar mishum bia achar bia kevan de bia doraisa amida yadia. People know you don't need to make any special decree. Abba Yossi ben Chanan, but Abba Yossi says, Sabrala kirabanan digzera bevia, the gazer chalitza mishum bia. He actually agrees that in both cases we need the gezerah. We need to make sure that the first act is the only one that matters. And that brings us to the 6th chapter. So as Hadron Alach Rabban Gamliel, Hadron Alach Rabban Gamliel, Hadron Alach Rabban Gamliel. And so that brings us to the 6th chapter, and we'll go through the Mishnah today, and we'll leave the Gemara for, God willing, tomorrow. So, Haba Yevamot, and this is going to teach that intentions do not matter when performing the marital relations that cause Yibum. If Shimon has marital relations with Rachel, Bain B'Shogeg, Bain B'Mezid, doesn't make a difference whether he does it. He thought he was sleeping with his wife, and it turns out he was sleeping with Rachel. Doesn't make a difference whether he thought he was sleeping with Rachel as an affair, but it turned out that Reuben had died and had left his wife and now she had to do Yibum or Chalitza. Bein ba'ones, bein b'ratzon. Doesn't make a difference if he was being forced to have the marital relations. Or it doesn't make it, of course, if he wanted to have the marital relations willingly. Afilu hu shogig v'hi mezida. Even if he was mistaken, meaning he thought he was having relations with a different woman, and she was being intentional. And by the way, this is similar to Yehuda and Tamar, right? He didn't know that he was having marital relations with Tamar. Who onus v'hi lo anusa? Or he was coerced and she was not coerced. Or he anusa v'hu lo anus, or she was coerced and he was not coerced. Ein echad hama'areh, whether you just had the initial cohabitation, the echad hagomer, or if one actually completed and had a full intercourse. So kana, then they are married. She has become his wife, and so as a result, Yibum has happened. Below chilek ben bia levia, and it doesn't make a difference what form of, whether it's usual when we say kedarka or shalom kedarka, that's usually just both forms of penetration. Those are going to be considered the kind of marital relations that will create a connection of Yibum. And so similarly, when it comes to having illegal relations in the Torah, it doesn't, or pasulos, or those who are disqualified for marriage, doesn't make a difference. Could go an almana lechohen gadol, like if you have an almana and a kohen gadol, doesn't make a difference whether they do it coercively or willingly. All these kind of situations, gerusha v'chalutza, lechohen hedyot, or a divorcee, or a chalutza for a regular kohen, a mamzeres or nesina leYisrael, a mamzeres, somebody who's a mamzer or a nesina, the Jews who entered into the agreement with the Givonites, that the Givonim that entered into the agreement with Yoshua and tricked him, and so as a result they were not really good converts, and so as a result we treat them as if they were mamzerim. Abbas Yisrael, a mamzer and a son, and then similarly a Jewish woman with a man who's a mamzer or a nasan. Below chilek ben via levia, and again, the Torah did not distinguish between the nature of the marital relations, and so we will get into all of this detail, God willing, over the next few days. And so I wish you a fabulous Shabbos, and I look forward to seeing you back on, I will be back on Monday. So I will look forward to seeing you on Monday.
Good Shabbos to you, Rabbi. Be well.
Be well as well. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.